20 years in and out of the web for construction projects and all kinds of stuff. So the talk I'm doing today is lessons learned in moving specifically enterprise projects, very large businesses, to open source. It could be Drupal, it could be other open source tools, just generally open source. My experience is in Drupal, but a lot of people who are at the enterprise level using Drupal are also willing to use other open source tools, so they sometimes converge. And so I'll just go through my slides and we can have some time for Q&A if people have questions. I have worked on some of the largest websites in Drupal, and including some of the largest websites in Drupal 5 core. So I have some experience in this area. So first, a definition of the word enterprise. Different people define it differently, but in this conversation, I'm defining it as something where the impact is to an organization rather than an individual. The needs are not just for you as a person, but they're for a group of people or a group of specific types of users. They are also technically large, so they might have a lot of people who work there. They might have just a very complex system, but few people. And then just that they're organizationally complex. They might have multiple editors, teams of editors, different people doing different roles, but in layers. And so sometimes, while the business might not be that complex, the people who it takes to run it might be very complex. And then also, newly interesting today, high security and performance consciousness. So they're very concerned about performance as it reflects their brand. Very concerned about security, obviously, as it reflects their brand and keeps their users safe. And they tend to be attack targets. So people are looking to take their sites down actively. Like they are in somebody's crosshairs. They're not just like, oh, it's Saturday, let's just take someone's site down. People are actually seeking weaknesses in these people's sites to try and take them down. So for open source, same thing. There's a bunch of different definitions of open source, but for this conversation, we're going to say that it's original. The original source code is made freely available and may be redistributed and modified. So this is a piece of the conversation later, but sometimes when enterprises buy or use open source, they think that they can treat them the same way that they've treated their proprietary tools and just customize them and then lock them down or fork them. And while people can do that with Drupal, we try to help them understand the ecosystem that they're involved in and why it's important not to do that and not to lock things down. They get great benefit from keeping things open. So also, if you're new to open source, probably nobody is at a bad camp, but if you are, it's not free as in free of charge, it's free as in puppies, so there's always work to do even if you're using an open source tool. It doesn't come free of charge in terms of making it do everything you need it to do and configuring it and whatnot. Oftentimes in enterprise there's a mix of open source, closed source tools, and you just have to make sure they're working together. Often they're always governed by a license of some kind. It's either open use, and there's usually some parameters which govern your use of that software or the code. And they're all supported by an ecosystem that's distributed and is contributed to by people who are paid or unpaid. That's one of the interesting things about open source, that you don't have a team of salaried developers whose job it is to make sure things work. There's a lot of volunteer effort here, and as such, it changes the way you have to deal with the community and the code. And just the metaphor here I used is just executing a backflip, because that's very often how this feels for people when they're changing CMSs. A lot of people who work in these large enterprises have worked there for decades in some cases, but they might never have replaced their content management system. It's a completely different kind of project than project managers typically manage. And so having experience managing projects within a company might not prepare you to actually manage a CMS replacement. And that's why people most often will hire an external company to do it, manage it, and execute it. So the prepare here is not, it's not about preparing like planning when you do a flip. It's about, you don't want to try to do a backflip for the first time without attempting to jump up on a chair, for example, and make sure you can get up there and have some decent height. The same way with a CMS project. You don't want to just prepare by, hey, we're going to start it Monday and then we're going to do this for a year. There's a lot more preparation that goes into it. There's muscles that you have to flex and prepare to undertake this whole effort. Some of those are content strategy, making sure that you have a plan for vendor contracts that are associated with the old CMS and they have to be renewed with the new one. For a lot of enterprise businesses, they're new to open source, and so understanding how it works, how an open source tool works, how contributed code works, a regular company's disposition in having to support contributed code is very different from some of the things that they've been involved in as far as contracts. So really important to read those licenses that govern your open source tools and make sure that they're compatible with other tools that you have and with your company in general. Sometimes companies aren't good with them. Security and audits and reviews, these can be really different. I've worked with a bunch of different large companies who already have a really well-placed, well-organized security review process, department, whatever it might be. The introduction of something open source, or even just something major and new into that system, can be a little bit of a left hook for some people. And so helping educate them about the tool, what is Drupal, what is this code base, what's the disposition of Drupal community around security, so they know, who are these people with regard to security? Do they care about it as much as we do? All that stuff is good to know, and the more you know about how you're going to lock it all down at the beginning, the better. Some tips that I've worked with, some companies that I've worked with have done is iterative security reviews. So they start out doing a code review of Drupal core and assume that they're not going to be hacks to Drupal core. You guys all know that, right? Not to hack core. So they will start out doing that and just do a review of Drupal core. Then they'll periodically review modules, like in a cycle. So every sprint, you put in a couple new modules, they'll do a code review, security review of those. So that by the time you're ending the project, they're really just like, okay, all of this together, we're going to review it together. But they've scanned the code for the modules, and it's already clear. Then it's just, did you introduce anything with the configuration that's a problem? So that's one way. Sometimes people have a very stringent process of doing that, and they're able to plug in a cyclical way, so doing a code review every 2 weeks, like with every new set of code that's deployed. Some of them are not organized that way, and they have a review that's like, we need 7 weeks with your finished code before you launch in order to approve it. So you need to find out which of those arenas you're playing in before you start, because you could be really surprised not being finished, and all of a sudden you got to turn in all of your code for a 7-week advance notice for security review. All of those security requirements and audits and reviews require some remediation time to be built into the schedule, so that if something is found that's major, you have enough time to address it without impacting your schedule. Another reason to get into that, periodic reviews. If there's something really huge you find, you can address it as you're doing development. Yeah.
It's also worth noting that you probably want to structure your contract in such a way that gets reported out to the security team of your company.
Yes.
Or your open source, whatever their security team is.
Yeah, that's a good point. We always subscribe our clients to the security reviews and notifications from Drupal, but yeah, staying in the loop and understanding what role the Drupal community plays in keeping Drupal secure and plugging into that. That's kind of part of playing in the Drupal community for big companies. They have a lot more at stake, and so it's almost a no-brainer. Like, then play hard in that community because you have a lot at stake. You want to make sure you got your fingers in everything that matters to you. Other ones are making sure that you're planning if there is going to be, now that we're on regular releases of Drupal, to make sure that if there is an update happening while your project workflow is happening, that you account for that. You might have to update, and you might have some things that all of a sudden become insecure that were locked down before. So that invokes a new review, a new version of Drupal. So just pay attention to that stuff, and now we have a little bit more predictability, thank goodness, about that stuff. But still, patches come through, and you still have to make sure that if you did something different, everybody who has a security eye on the code knows you did something different, and that has to be reviewed. All right. Next, in terms of migration, I have a lot to say about migration because I've worked on a lot of really hairy, painful migrations in my career. The amount of prep is just so important, and to me, I advocate people getting prepared to migrate their site before they even pick a vendor, before they're even deciding when to start the project, because usually enterprise companies have a lot of data. Because they're enterprise, it's typically older, or it dates back much further. Some of it, because they're older and maybe already had a CMS 10 years ago when newer companies didn't have one yet, they might have migrated legacy data into their old CMS, into their latest CMS, and now they're migrating into a new one. So the older and longer standing that companies have, the more likely it is that their data is going to be non-conforming or unusual or not all similar, not structured, and keeping a structure that applies across all of the pieces of data. A lot of old CMSs were in HTML pages, so people migrated big blocks of text into, fields in Drupal sometimes. So you have to really look at the quality of the data going in. Couple disaster stories I have are when a large company was migrating a support community, they didn't really scope the private groups that they had. So they had all these different public groups for different products and stuff, but they didn't scope all of the private groups. And they're a big company that sells hardware, and so they have private groups for like the large company like GE might use their tools, and they have a private support group. So if you're using a particular product and you work at GE, you get faster service and it's expert and whatnot. So they just forgot all about all those groups until they were building the CMS, and then it was like, oh, what about our private groups? Like, what about your private groups? So another thing is that a lot of times you have to go and be a sleuth about the data, because you're looking at a data table. You might not know what every row and column means. You're just looking at a bunch of numbers maybe, and it doesn't mean anything to you. So you're like, we don't need to migrate that, but it might really be meaningful to someone in a different department, or someone 10 years ago who is running this tool that requires a 1 in this column, or else it won't work. So that's one of the biggest challenges with data migration, is just making sure that you really know what you've got, that everybody knows what you're migrating, what's not worth migrating, and really be willing to make that determination. But some of us just like, it's not going to do anything for us, or we're moving into a personalization platform. This is old, it doesn't really help us anymore. We're about to get supercharged, so we don't want to pollute it with all this old stuff. It's better and cleaner if we just have the username and email, their gender if we have that, and their home address. Everything else is just old and isn't going to necessarily help us. So just understand how much work it is, the more data you have, to make sure that it's conformant and structured and can be as meaningful in your new CMS as it is when you migrate.
There's additional questions. Is it worth migrating?
Yeah.
Or can you pay an intern to sit there and type for 6 hours?
Yeah, there is the sort of the balance with migration is a lot of it can be done by machine, and the more conformant and regular it is, the more it can be done by machine. But then at a certain point, you're like diminishing return. Now it's like, it takes me an hour to script it, but it's saving you an hour. And then it's like, okay, it takes me 5 hours to script it and saving you 20 minutes, so it's like, I'm going to stop doing it. So that's definitely key. The way that I've worked is I use a spreadsheet that dumps all of the data into it, and then there's a field that says migrate, do not migrate, and they just select it down the way. Then there's also the challenge of validating the migration when you're done. So oftentimes a migrating person, a developer who's doing a migration, will be able to say, okay, I got 1,000 nodes before, I executed at 1,000 nodes. It doesn't necessarily mean every single field went to the field that it's supposed to be in, or that the relationship stayed between the way it used to be related and all of that meaning and how it ended up in the new system, just because of architectural differences or whatever. So the customer really has to have people who are data experts, people who are used to looking at those dashboards and those lists of users and those supporters, and know how to recognize when something's broken. Because if we do it, we're just strictly counting. Like, we got 73 and we got 73. They might all be in different order, but you got 73 of them, and that's not as important. That's not as good as what they had. And so you really need to make sure they know how much time it takes to validate data, set their expectations for it, and then really get I think I have a slide that says this, that you define success before you start. So looking at your data, making sure the migration person is familiar enough with it that they recognize the patterns, and then defining like, okay, I think I can get to 85% of your data by script. The rest is going to be harder or manual, and get them to agree essentially on that. Either it's going to be that 15% of the data is less meaningful. It might be older accounts. It might be worth letting go of, but it might be that the data you're looking at dropping is really critical to them, and they have to figure out a way. And so for their planning, they need to get that data, and they have to migrate it manually. It's going to take 10 people 6 months, so they have to know, like right now, so they can plan it. So that stuff, all really important with migration. It can be very painful when it doesn't go well. I've done some migrations that had such a giant database that you had to actually have, like the developer had 2 computers, because they would just start running an update and then set that aside for the day and then actually work and then start an update here and work on this one. So some of they can get really giant and really start to challenge you. But definitely worth planning for migration. Next thing is get rolling. So people learning how to do backflip, a lot of times the hardest thing is just doing one, a single one, because it's really scary. You're throwing yourself backwards. But you can't stand at the edge of the platform forever. You've got to do something. And so you can start with proofs of concept. You can start with training. You can start with anything that just gets you moving on in some area. Content strategy is a great place to start. Analyzing your content, seeing what your pieces are that you have. Use spotters. So obviously important when you're learning a backflip. Maybe not as obvious to people when they're doing a big tech project. The spotters are good for any technology you haven't used before. So when people hire Drupalists because they want to use it but they've never used it. A lot of people who hire us to do Drupal are planning on doing it themselves after the project is built, so they're hiring us and they're getting trained alongside the development team, so that they just basically take ownership once the development is complete. But the spotters are important. They can also help you from the outside perspective, just have perspective. Sometimes you can't see everything that's going on internally. And then a lot of times why somebody like me gets brought in, an external project manager, is just because it is a lot of work, and it's not work that everybody's familiar with. And the people who are working at the company already have jobs, and they're usually full-time already. And this isn't something like a giant CMS replace. It's not something you can just kind of slip in alongside with a side project. For people, it really does, to do it right, it takes their full-time focus. Typically, when we're working on an enterprise project, we have the team at the client is full-time with us. And it just can be worth it to get someone who has experience managing this type of project and the technology that you're used to working with, Drupal, whatever other open source tools you have. So the experts of support can be not only Drupal technology people, but also just people in your network who've done this before. So, hey, Fred, have you ever managed a CMS replacement over at your company? What was your belly flop? Like, what did you learn, and how painful was it, and what can you tell me to prepare myself? So look to your network. I learn a lot about the companies I'm going to be working with from asking people who I know. Like, what's it like to go in there cold, not know anything, to work for 6 months? Are people open to outsiders, or are they very steeled and defensive? So it can make a difference between just the disposition of people when you're ready to work. And then you can also, of course, ask experts and people who are experienced in the field that you're working in. Developers who are on the company's team might need support in ramping up. So typically, the companies we work with on these large enterprise projects, they have technical teams. They're almost never outsourcing all of their technical development to some company, some professional services company. What they have, though, is they have an existing system that they need to maintain, and that's what their team is doing while we're over here on the side building their new replacement. And oftentimes we will share resources, and sometimes we'll have a developer who actually works on our team, and he's getting trained in Drupal and best practices and code reviews and the whole thing as he's learning, and also serves as an SME on our side to like, oh, you know how this works, because so they're sort of like a plant alongside the technical team, and then at the same time they're getting ramped up. So a lot of times these technical handoffs can take a few months. Like, this is a complex system. There's a lot of custom code a lot of times. There's a lot of new integrated systems, and they can take some time to ramp up on, even if you know the technologies that they're in. And here we have people who are adopting Drupal. They've almost never used it before, or they've used it on some small side project, piloting it, and now it's like, now 8's out, and they're all really ready to jump in. They might not have ever been able to use Drupal before, so they're ramping up on Drupal, and then also the crazy custom extended way that you've configured their CMS. So there's a lot of ramp up time. Mercy and understanding and love and celebration of development milestones are really important for the developers on the client team and on the technical team. So almost always the enterprise teams are running really hard and hot and for a long time, and so they need love. So ready your body and your mind. When you're about to embark on a big enterprise project, whether you're working in a Drupal shop and it's like, oh God, we've been working on these small ones, we got a big one coming in. You really need to be prepared, because it can take you down, it can take the whole company down or in for weeks at a time if something goes wrong. There can just be a lot of action all of a sudden, and it's important to prepare yourself as the company, the people at your client who you're working with. It's a great idea for people who are going to be working intensely to make sure they take a vacation before the project starts, because it doesn't work as well as they do it during. So make sure people are really rested up, like literally ready your body and your mind. Make sure you can take it, because it's super intense. It probably is more intense on the part of the client, because they're doing their regular job and trying to keep up and deliver. A lot of things I hear from our clients is like, my job is riding on this project success. That's the first word sometimes people utter to me, like, don't let me fall down here. My job is riding on this. So obviously, if somebody's job's riding on it, make sure that they're ready to undertake it and they have the support they need externally. Sometimes when I'm escalating things to a client's supervisors, it's because they don't have enough free time to do the work that we need them to do. So we're like pressuring them and taxing them and they're breaking down. But we can't do anything about that. We need their boss to free up their time so they can focus on what we're doing. So sometimes you have to actually escalate over allocation of the customer's resources because they're standing in your way and blocking you. So acknowledging the magnitude of the work. These are big projects, sometimes 20,000 hours of development work in projects that I've worked on, sometimes more. So it took a lot of people for a long time at times, and just making sure that you're clear. It's a lot of work. There's lots of phases. There's lots of places to break down and break through. So you can't let the ship go down the first breakdown that happens. Just remember it is a long haul, and the more you account for that, the better. The more you understand it, the better. Proofs of concept. This is kind of an interesting topic. I was at DrupalCon, and it was really brought up like how people organize their teams around Drupal 8 because it's new and not everybody has even had a chance to work on it yet. And for some smaller companies, they're still working on Drupal 7 projects and finishing those, so people still haven't, after a year, been able to work with it yet. So a couple people got into a birds of a feather session. We were talking about how Drupal shops are organizing people around learning and getting certified if they're seeking that or just understanding how to use Drupal 8, and then developing their own best practices because those are still emerging for Drupal 8. It took us 7 years to establish really good ones for all the parts of Drupal 7, and they're still really emerging for 8, and a lot of things are still changing. So they're going to be emerging for a while. And one of the folks mentioned that they have a person on the team who does proofs of concept in Drupal 8. So he's knows it best, and so he'll kind of dare out on the tips of an edge and try stuff. And he just kind of stays just ahead of the team as a way to okay, I've tried this out and I think it's going to work, to pass it to the work back. One way to just kind of stay ahead of that. So I just thought that was an interesting thing to mention. And a specific assignee for our proofs of concept. So keeping your eyes focused forward. I mentioned this before, but it's really, you can't look back. Once you started building your site at 8 years, 6 months in, you can't be like, if only we'd done it in 7. So it's sort of like the no way out but through thing. Just figure it out, work with the community, get as much support as you can, because I'm sure there's someone else trying to do the same thing out here, and just try to keep breaking through instead of breaking down. So a couple other tips. Sometimes with these enterprise projects, people are more used to working with waterfall, so they're really used to getting this gigantic, the manual of the site at the end of the project. That's gigantic, printed, flip through PDF thing that's just a gigantic manual, and it documents everything, like a business requirements doc type thing. And because we work in Agile, because we work in open source where a lot of the documentation is already out there on Drupal.org, we really try to err on the side of documenting decisions that we're making, what's the technical conversation we're having, and what are the pros and cons of taking either of the decisions that we have, the choices we have, and then what did we finally decide and why. So that 2 years from now, when someone else is managing the project and a similar situation comes up or a similar decision point, you don't have to rehash the conversation, or at least you have a record of what the conversation was 2 years ago when the same sort of thing came up. Maybe you're in a different place now, but that's some of the more complicated stuff to rehash because people forget why they made decisions. For us, it's self-protective, so CYA, if you're a project manager and you're working in a Drupal shop, make sure you're documenting the decisions so you don't get your butt toasted. Because if you don't justify it, or if they think, you guys just drove us through this decision, we didn't really want to make it, but you guys made it for us, that type of stuff happens, and it's very dangerous for your contract. So we try to really document the decisions. If a choice point comes up, you can go with Drupal 7 or Drupal 8, we always document that decision. Why are we choosing 7? What are the advantages of 8? Which way are we going to go? We discussed the pros and cons. Here they were. And we went this way. So anybody who revisits that question a year from now when things are getting really hairy and you're about to launch and you can't get things to work, and somebody asks, why did we ever go with 8? You just hand them the paper. You don't have to go back and have the conversation again because you already had that. So just I would definitely recommend the decisions, not the functionality. You can go look at the functionality and see how that works. If there's business logic, you have to document that stuff because it's hard to discover. Any kind of customization, extension of code, you always want to document that. But primarily in terms of the moving stuff that you're documenting, the stuff that doesn't end up in Jira or whatever tool you're using just because of the way developers work. We have a running architecture document which has these, a little template for these decisions in it, and every time one comes up, we just add it as a section. So it's just a running thing. Anyone can look in at any time and then after the fact, it's a whole history of all the running decisions that were made. Yeah. It's if you have not really made a practice of doing that rigorously, it will totally change your life. First of all, because a lot of customers, like, they'll make a decision if it never comes back to them. Like, nobody ever knows they're the one making it. They'll make decisions. But if you get very rigorous about saying, okay, we've talked about this, I cautioned you against going this way, you say you want to do it anyway, right? Okay, you're signing your name on it. Like, the decision is yours. So you document that, send it to people, and like all of a sudden people who are having to stand up and be the one who makes the decision, they're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I'll think about that. If you're advising me against it, and I have to be the one to have my name on it, I'll rethink it. So when you really like stand up to people and their pressures, that's one of the ways that they fold. It's like, oh, maybe I wasn't so sure that it's not the right way. So I just recommend that. It's a really good, I've had a lot of things turn around because finally they're like, oh, you guys really are making all these decisions all the time. And they're important, and we need to pay attention. Sometimes people are trying to... What?
When they don't back down and you have your lawyer draw it.
Yeah, then at least you're...
Yeah,
then at least you're protected.
Please sign here.
We actually have a formal process at Acquia for launching sites. So when we're hosting a site, we started doing Acquia Ready in these site audits because we would have people develop who weren't Acquia, and we'd have a site and like think it was okay, and then it's just a lemon, and then it wouldn't stand up or something that was wrong. And we have a hosting contract. We're like, we don't know what this person did with the site, but it won't stand up. So we actually have a formal paper document, which if we are telling someone, hey, you need an additional load balancer, you don't want to pay for a load balancer? Okay. But we're telling you need one, and you're deciding to launch a site without it, so here's the possible repercussions, sign here. And we have to have those on record before we'll launch it. So that's like the very tool-based, like what size server are you working with, what's your load balancer, etc. But that's the end game of that same process as it comes to support. This is a separate contract. We need them to know if we're expecting a particular way of being to come into support and they're not doing that there's going to be breakdowns. There will be blood, and we want them to sign something ahead of time. Next is the developers, to think about them too. Several of the projects I'm working on this last couple of years have been, I've done discovery, and in discovery, it's very obvious to me, I'm a people person, so I can pick up a lot on people's unspoken language, that the developers are looking for the improvement just as much as the marketing team. And if they have to keep on working on a kludgy, just half-baked system, they're all going to leave. And thinking about the stakeholders, the developers as stakeholders is really important, especially when you're doing discovery. You have a client team of technical people, you have a partner or Acquia or whatever team of technical people. The client team is going to have to take this over. And if it's even harder to operate than their old system, or you're not solving some of the problems they have with their current system, then there's a chance of attrition. And when you are a company that's enterprise and you've just launched your brand new CMS and all the people you just trained on it are leaving, it's a really, really difficult situation. So really consider the development team. What are they asking for? Is this going to solve their problem? So I've been working with this team who is, they manage like a site factory type of platform where they have customers who get a product site and they just spin it up, and it's like for them, it's like investor press release management, compliance management. And they're developers. There's one guy who's like the views guy on their team because they have about 350 views, and they're all slightly different. How you want your press release listed, date first, or day spelled day out versus the number. There's like all these variations on like the view of the press release, like 35. And he, on the team, his role is to be the one who they ask which view I use. Because they're so poorly cataloged and so many that everybody just doesn't know. And they'd have to just sit there, trial and error, and use it and see it. So he's like the guy in the room who's like, hey, what's the view for this? And he's like, 47. So if Jay ever decides to move on, the productivity of that team is going to be like half of where it is now. And so that's the type of stuff. Just really consider what's the disposition of the team as you're doing this changeover. Sometimes you have people who totally did not want to use Drupal, and they're pissed because they wanted to stay a .NET developer and they can't anymore, and that was their whole career, and now they're going to be like dragging a foot and being that guy in the meeting who's interrupting and naysaying everything. But sometimes if you're doing discovery and you start right out with that person, you can, even like the technical architect can get them all interested in something and just like manage them, geek out with them, help them see how .NET technology and what they're interested in applies, get them excited about open source. There's all kinds of ways to subtly manipulate people to be excited about Drupal if they're not already. But that is one thing. Like sometimes you have to really be an evangelist to get everybody on your side so you can make progress. Instead of like, oh my god, every time I go in there, people are fighting me about using Drupal. Like the manager's decided, so I can't spend all my time, discussing this with people. So sometimes that stuff gets escalated. Like some guy is a detractor, and he won't play ball. Technical debt. So technical debt with huge projects is typically huge, and so you do not want to wait until the end to deal with technical debt. My recommendation is to, every couple of sprints, 80-20 rule is every 4 sprints of development you do one of technical debt. At least do that when you're doing development. Lots of people deal with lots of different ways. Sometimes there's a team who's dealing with technical debt if it's a large build, and it's like the cleanup team, and then there's the development team. Sometimes people do it as one every other sprint. Sometimes it's a few sprints of development, and then there's one totally focused on technical debt. This is another area where we document. So if someone is making a technical decision that increases technical debt, and that's one of the drawbacks of it, that's one of the pieces we document. Like this is creating this tenuous fibrous connection over here that we need to address later. If it breaks, it's going to break it down, and we need to, we may be getting something really awesome with this technical decision, but the technical debt is something that we try to, when we can see what it is, we document. That is also really important. Sometimes people's decisions are just creating a huge amount of debt, and you didn't estimate that amount of debt. And all of a sudden you have just like a way more technical debt than you thought, and the scope of the project was not counting on having to resolve all of that. You almost always launch a site with technical debt, but you just have to know what it is and know that it's worth launching the site for. Like we could address it, but it's more important for us to launch the site now, or is it more important for us to address it? If you don't know what it is, you can't really make that decision in a knowledgeable place. Usually the more innovative you're being with software, the more technical debt you're going to have. Drupal 8 projects right out of the gate are going to have more technical debt than Drupal 8 projects that start 2 years from now, just because things are still moving. People are doing workarounds because some part of some module isn't done yet. So just keep that stuff in mind, especially with Drupal 8. As you're coming out of the gate, document the technical debt, acknowledge to the client, like, hey, we're going out on a limb because the module that you need is not ready, so we're doing this instead. We could hold off. That's one option always. Wait. You can't have that feature until it's ready, until the module's ready. Or if you need it, we're going to build it for you, but we'll have to address that and go back to the contributed code later because it's going to add to their costs ongoing for maintenance. So address it as you go, or you will have a false sense of quality and completeness. You don't want to have that security review find everything. The 80-20 rule, so at least one technical for 4 development sprints. This is more after you've launched the site and you're doing feature development. But when you're actually doing build, you have to address it based on how much of it is generating, and that depends on the decision. High-risk debt items first. So if you have something that's like, I mocked up this code on my weekend drinking, I think it'll work. That if that gets launched, assume that that's a high-risk item, and you want to address that first next code release you have. And then version updates for software for modules is also technical debt. So when you have one that's expired and no longer supported, now you have something that either you're going to have to support because the module maintainer's not doing it anymore, or that you have to upgrade to the newest version, and so it is supported. So that's technical debt too. If you have 50 modules, you're going to have really different technical debt than if you have 250. So just as a baseline, you can kind of tell how much of it you're going to have. And then practice the tech. This is launch practice. So how we do it is we have an hour of launch, week of launch, day of launch checklist. We work on this with the client about a month before we actually do the launch. It has every single task we could possibly think of that has to be done, from scrubbing email.com email addresses, replacing actual users in the database, changing the DNS time to live, deleting something, informing people. It has everything. So we have a group conversation, all the different departments that it touches, and we have a baseline that we use as a template, and then they add and we add other things based on what specifically the project is. Sometimes there's a differential migration that has to take place like 3 days before the launch because you have a live site that it's replacing and you need the newest content. It can have all kinds of different pieces, but practice this stuff because you don't want it to be the first time you're looking at it like the day before because some of the stuff has lead time. So this is definitely, if you really want to stick the launch, make sure you practice it. And then stick the landing. So this is really making sure the coast is clear before you advertise. So you've launched. You don't usually want to be like, we're launching, and we've done a press release that's announcing it today. Because sometimes it doesn't work out the way you Sometimes you have to roll back. Other times, this actually happened with a client I worked with a few years ago. They have so many employees, and all their employees have authenticated accounts on their site. So when they send out a memo, everybody check out the new support community, everybody in the company goes and logs in and takes the site down because it's not used to having that many logged in users at one time, but everybody wants to go and log in. So you have to just kind of think about that, like trickle in that launch, or make sure you've got really bolstered for the first few weeks with extra servers so that you know people are going to go check it out. So make sure you're ready for it. And then as you find out that you're overloaded, you can back them off. So either way works, but just make sure that you know who's the universe of people who are going to go right to this site as soon as they know it's live. Facebook relaunches, probably everybody as soon as they find out that it's a new site is going to be like, what do they do? That type of stuff. So just know your audience. This one was, it's like a support community, so technical support, it's all technical people. They're all going to log in and geek out and cruise around the site and check it out because they're all interested in the fact that it just relaunched. And they're interested in the fact that it's Drupal and open source. And so they had a hard time keeping their site up for the first 3 weeks because people were just like, oh, I'll try it now. Nope, still down. So it was definitely painful. So just make sure it's all good before you shout it from the rooftops. If you have a launch and you have to market it, then do a beta internally. Make sure you've gone through the steps and launch it on some other URL, even if you don't show it to anybody. But just so you've gone through the process and you know it can be replaced. And then actively monitor after launch. Hopefully that goes without saying, but make sure you don't just put it out there and forget it. Again, sometimes the traffic patterns can be very different. Sometimes we often are going on an assumption, like a reported assumption of traffic for an enterprise site build, and the client themselves are wrong about their own traffic. So maybe they've just implemented Cloud Edge and they're not getting any bot traffic anymore, and a lot of their traffic was bots, and now it's like a lot less, so they can actually scale down on the servers. Sometimes they're getting a lot of different traffic. All of a sudden they're mobile, and people can actually use their site on their phone, so now they're getting 35% spike because people couldn't use their phone before to use their site, and all of a sudden they are, and they're interested in doing that. So definitely monitor your sites after they launch and make sure that they're functioning well. The other thing is sometimes new sites are very attractive targets for hacking, so make sure that you're doing that too. Performance and load tests after launch are also good to run, so you can always do these models and assumptions and whatnot, but it's great to run once you actually launch the site. You can run it at night when you have low traffic and to see how things are faring. You can also, if you have reports of certain transactions that are slow, you can specifically test those things. Just refine it. Yeah.
Just wondering, are there certain tools that you use for load testing?
We use JMeter and BlazeMeter, and there's some other. Some of our customers actually have a third party. It's pretty common. So like Red7, they'll do like security and performance testing. That's a common one. But yeah, it's all over the map. Like people sometimes come to us and they want us to do so much that that's what they don't want us to do because there's like a second set of eyes. Because like we can't have somebody else do the Drupal. You have to host it. So what can we have some second set of eyes? So often the really large projects have an external security review, either by the company themselves if they have that, or they hire a third party to do a code review. Yeah, same thing with that they have third-party entities who do it. We in our launch readiness testing, we use BlazeMeter and JMeter, and basically we model like up to 10 scenarios, transactional scenarios where you're like logging in, logging out, changing your username or something, or your password. So confirm and monitoring the traffic. Sometimes like where people are off in their predictions is just they have a new site and people actually want to create an account, and so they have way more authenticated traffic now than they used to, and so it's not functioning as smoothly and finely as it used to. So just monitoring things like did our assumptions before we built the site, are they proving out in our actual data, on our analytics, and is there anything we need to do to address where they're not proving out as accurate? And then finally, the follow through. They say with your arms when you're doing a backflip. If you don't follow through, you will get taken all over the mat. And so like Ellen Biles, she falls totally through, and I'm like, sticks down there like glue. And that's what you have to do with a website too. Make sure that you are that you're following through. You're maintaining the site. You're looking at the code. A lot of times the client team is, they're just starting to do bug fixing and start to maintain it. They might need external support still. But just make sure, especially if you're supporting an enterprise client to launch, that you plan for and keep talking about other support they might need. Sometimes they can handle it for a few weeks and then they get bogged down. They need more help. So make sure you stay in touch and follow through with them. And then budget adjustments, 80-20. The maintenance stuff. I use the rule 80-20. So 80% of the cost of a new, sorry, whatever you spent on your CMS build, you'll spend 20% of that total cost maintaining it ongoing. So each year, if you spend 100K, you'll probably spend 20K-ish maintaining that same site. That's not counting new feature development, so as you're adding new scope and making it a bigger thing, the maintenance cost is going to increase. The more you encourage people to stay out of the box, and the more they're not extending and customizing code, the lower that number will be. So if it's 20% is a concern, have that be the way they make their decisions when you're building, not after the fact be upset because they have to spend more than 20%, especially if that's not possible for them. They don't have the budget. If you're building something for a nonprofit and they can't swallow a 20% increase of their costs, then you have to account for that. So that is it. We have a couple minutes for questions. Yes?
I have a question about the technical debt conversation. So with like the 80-20, like sprints and then a sprint for technical debt, like how do you have that conversation with clients as far as like, because technical debt, like it sounds like almost like you're doing something wrong.
Yeah.
And like I'm not even having a challenge conversation, like some clients are like, we expect no bugs.
Oh yeah,
And
I've had
so
that one too.
like just getting through the we expect no bugs conversation is like one level, but like the like technical debt, like the whole sprint just to redo the things
Do it
we
right.
did
Yeah.
a month ago, like
Just do it right. the first time. Yeah, so the way we handle it is to pre-inform people. Like, this project is going to generate technical debt. Let's talk about what that is. Educate them about it. Why is this happening that we have technical debt? So they're not blaming the developer, because that's what happens. People are like, wait, what do you mean? You didn't finish it last sprint or something? They just don't know how to interpret it sometimes. People who are technical will. They know what technical debt is. You don't have to convince them. They're probably trying to tell their bosses about the stuff they'd like to fix and address that they've had to neglect for years. But the marketing people and other people that we often are working with as project managers don't. And so it is really educational for them to learn about it. And that's the approach we take, is just teach them about it so that they're not blaming you later. The same thing with documentation. Like, we're not going to document anything. Drupal.org, every module we use will document those. And here's the link to Drupal.org, and that has the most current, most up-to-date documentation there is. So why make it a step away from there by doing it ourselves? You know, it'd be like 2 days, and then it's updated and it's out of date. So all that stuff is educational. It's here's how we're planning the sprints. Here's why it doesn't look like we're doing anything in this 5th one and this 10th one and this 15th one. It's because we're starting to lock it down, and so we're moving toward launch. And you know, a lot of these things are very they're sort of vapory when you first do them, or you learn the better way to do them while you're doing it, or you just haven't done another feature that has to plug into them, and so there's just a piece of it that is still left to connect. And maybe you deprioritize that piece, but there's still this piece over here that was hoping to connect with something, and so just clean that up so it's not hanging out there. Nobody runs across it and they're like, where is this supposed to go? This random piece of code is supposed to connect to something, and there's nothing over there. So education, that's the key. Anyone else? Question? Yeah.
It's related to that question. It is about technical debt. I know technical debt as a softer term, a very conceptual term, and yet the way you are identifying it here, you know, lists and identify high-risk items on that list. How do you
arrive at it?
Yeah, how do you go about it to make it a very hard and fast subject to talk about?
That's a good question.
Lists or
when working with developers. In the sort of sprint planning conversations and such, that's often where this stuff comes up, is sort of like a developer will take a ticket and they'll say, okay, here's what's being asked for, still waiting for this module or this piece of this module that's not done in 8, but I can use this other thing for now, so we can show it to them, that type of thing. So they'll like demo something, but it's using something that's not optimal, it's not the end game. So developers can tell it on themselves. They often know when they're generating technical debt. And then otherwise it's coming from notifications of module updates and core, that type of stuff is generating. And so that's very concrete. Like, we have a new module version, we have to update it. That's technical debt. So that stuff's easy to arrive at. The stuff that is actually, the developers are creating it with their code is the stuff that's harder to arrive at. And there, it's either the security reviews, performance reviews are doing periodically that will highlight those things, or it's they themselves will know that the optimal way we wanted to be doing this is this way. For expediency, we're doing it this way, or so we can hit this demo or this public, milestone. We're doing it this way, but we're writing down, and we spend 4 hours to go back and undo this later.
So they're tuned into it and capturing that information along the way as opposed
Yeah.
to trying to go back and audit.
Yeah, you can't always audit and find it. That is something not everybody's sensitized to. Like not every developer functions in that way. But if you're a skilled project manager and you have your eyes on, and a technical architect, you have your eyes on documenting that stuff and noticing it. The bigger projects, it's a bigger deal to document it and know it. The smaller projects, you kind of have time to clean up everything that you're going to notice. But some of these code bases are just so huge that if you don't notice it right when someone notices it, it just falls by the wayside, and it's another detail that somebody didn't document. So it's good to sensitize your developer team to that. When are you taking a shortcut and not doing it the optimal way? And tell that on yourself. Like it's okay, you got the ticket done, it does the thing it's supposed to do, but is it optimal? Then the client can look at these things and say, okay, it's not optimal, but it works. Like making it optimal is not really a priority because it works and it's not the most important feature we have. So it's important for them to know, here I'm doing this and we're taking on more in this sprint than we should because we're going to use these couple of shortcuts or do things in this way that we'll revisit later or we'll plan to if it doesn't work. Sometimes you're trying something and you don't know if it's going to work and you learn that it does, and so it doesn't necessarily create a dead situation.
A lot of time technical debt comes up not because of anything you did, but because of something someone didn't do the most efficient or most usable way. Most of the time I see, or at least when I'm aware of it, is I wrote this thing that does this thing one time, and then I needed it again later.
Right.
Command C, Command V. And that's not the optimal way to do it, but extrapolating it, abstracting it to the point where I can, use it in both places without duplicating it.
Right. And some of those you might not even see now.
Yeah.
But you're like,
Yeah.
I noticed I built this other section of the site and I see I can reuse the same thing.
But the important thing seems to be you have to be capturing that as you go along.
Yeah. I mean,
I've
yeah.
never heard the way to
Just-
go back and audit.
Yeah, just know it when you're creating it. Like,
Yeah,
sensitize
at one
people
point recently,
to.
I left a comment in my code that said, if you're copying and pasting it, it's because you should be abstracting it. Go do that instead. And someone did. I think like a month later, someone came along and was like,
I've seen some very inappropriate things in code comments.
Yeah.
those are usually on my Git.
That's another session.
Yeah. Like not to-
I'd love to do some kind of like screenshot RSS feed of just like inappropriate code comments that people
That would
find.
be a good one.
Yeah.
That would be
It's like, look what I found. I see sometimes it's something we sensitize our team to, but sometimes people get frustrated when they're coding late at night sometimes, and it's like, something for the person who can't make up their damn mind, or
Yeah.
put it in there. And it's like, okay, well, for posterity, that's in there.
I will confess to having a Git commit log at one point that said, reverting this for the 4th damn time.
Yes, I actually had a client call me out to discuss some of the comments that they found in code. Hey, I thought everybody was on the same team, kind of thing. It was really detrimental and caused a little training session company-wide where we could talk about that and why not